The topic of how much salt that you should consume daily is one of the most controversial and misunderstood topics that we could have about your health today. So that's why in this video we are going to take it head on. We're going to first discuss whether or not salt is even healthy for you to consume, and then also we'll discuss how much you should be consuming every day. Hey Wellness Warrior, it's Dr. Zyrowski, and for me growing up, salt was always considered something that was not that healthy for you. You never wanted to overdo it at the dinner table. You had to make sure that you kept it to a minimum because it could ruin your health. It could cause things like high blood pressure and so many things that you don't ever want to deal with, things that so many people are facing today. It's one of those things where if we look at all the people who are suffering from cardiovascular complaints, whether it's cholesterol issues, high blood pressure, or even worse, heart disease, we always look back to salt and say, that potentially could be the culprit in today's Western medicine. But the fact is the reality is much different. I want you to tell me in the comments below, is this something that you were taught that you should be avoiding salt? And who taught you this? Because I'd be curious to know. Was it your doctor? Was it just maybe a family member? Who taught you that you should be avoiding salt? Now, I today have patients come in all the time and they tell me, Dr. Zyrowski, I have high blood pressure and it just won't go down. I'm avoiding salt, I'm eating all the things I'm supposed to, and it just stays up there as they are sitting there with insulin resistance and on medication for that, and they're obese and they have all these problems, and their main concern is salt. And the fact is that they're looking for health solutions in all the wrong places. So let's go ahead and take a look at this whole salt topic. Now, the American Heart Association, the CDC, and even the FDA have their own recommendations as to how much salt you should be consuming. Now, the reason that they think this is a big deal is because they are telling us that consuming too much salt leads to a few things: high blood pressure, heart attack, and even strokes. So if you're consuming too much salt, you could end up in those shoes. And that's something you should reasonably be concerned about. If you look statistically how many people suffer from this, it's a huge number. Now, according to the American Heart Association, they recommend that you consume less than 1,500 milligrams of salt per day. Now, if we look at the FDA and also the CDC, they're saying that you should be consuming below 2,300 milligrams per day. When we look at this, we're going to, first of all, look at how much salt I think you should be consuming daily, and also what are the resources you should be looking to for good salt intake. So we'll get to all those, but first I actually want to talk about some of the symptoms that are associated with a decrease of salt or sodium intake. So here's some of the symptoms we have to look at. First is going to be increase in cravings. So if you have a sodium intake, essentially you are going to crave likely sweets much more. So more carbs, more sweets, and just a lot of foods that you shouldn't be eating. So you're gonna have an increase in cravings, of course, probably causing you to consume too many calories throughout the day, which could lead to a problem with you gaining too much weight. So anyway, increase in cravings. The next is gonna be increase in insulin resistance. Can you believe that if you have a depletion of sodium in your body and you're not consuming enough sodium every day, it increases your risk of insulin resistance? Pretty crazy. It also increases your blood glucose, increases stress hormones, which we know increases insulin resistance and blood sugar. So it's increasing those stress hormones. So you could see like these couple things could work synergistically off of each other. Now, also, it's going to lead to a decrease in energy and more fatigue, okay? So if you're feeling fatigued all the time, and I have been in these shoes before because when I was training really heavily for Spartan races and competing in a lot of different races, essentially, I was putting myself into this huge sodium depletion. Now, at the time, back when this was all happening to me, nobody was really talking about increasing your sodium intake. In fact, it was still kind of frowned upon to increase sodium intake simply because it was dangerous for you. So I would have these awful energy problems that would just kill me. And then, what I would do is I would turn to caffeine, and we'll talk about the problem of doing that in just a second, especially if you already have a low amount of sodium in your body. So next thing, it leads to poor sleep. People who have a lack of sodium in their diet, they find themselves waking up more throughout the night. It leads to arrhythmias, okay? I felt this at a very young age. This is a huge thing. So if you're getting arrhythmias look to increasing your sodium intake. It's very important. You know, the electrical system in the body requires sodium. It is an electrolyte. And so your heart, which is a muscle, will suffer if you don't have proper amounts of sodium in your diet. Next is muscle weakness, okay? This is also very common. You're gonna get more spasms, you're gonna just feel weak and lethargic all the time. On our list next is erectile dysfunction, increase in LDLs. Now this one actually is pretty surprising because the research shows that it actually leads to an increase in LDLs if you have a lack of sodium in your diet. And you would think, according to what we hear from like the American Heart Association and typical Western medicine doctors, that you need to avoid salt if you want to avoid high LDLs. Well, if you don't have enough increase in LDLs, and that's always considered, you know, the bad cholesterol according to today's doctors, which we don't want to get too far down that path, but that's kind of a myth too. And then also it leads to an increase in triglycerides, okay? So all of these issues happen due to a lack of sodium in the diet. So this is something we really want to pay attention to and make sure that we are getting adequate sodium. Okay, now a good question that I typically get is, well, how do you get a depletion of sodium in your body? Well, there's a couple things. First of all, maybe you just weren't consuming enough to begin with, right? But the other thing is that you will lose sodium when you exercise. It's estimated that you lose about 1,200 milligrams of sodium per hour of exercise. Now here's the thing too, is that it depends on the intensity of exercise too. Now imagine like you're a football player in the heat of Florida, right? You are going to lose a lot more versus somebody who's maybe doing some light jogging in a cooler temperature. So you have to consider that. So it does depend on the intensity of exercise, but in general, around 1,200 milligrams per hour of exercise. Now, the other thing that causes you to lose sodium is drinking coffee. It's estimated that 2 coffees will cause you to lose right around 1,200 milligrams of sodium. And a lot of people drink around 2 coffees a day. Now, the irony of all of this is that if you follow the American Heart Association recommendations of consuming around 1,500 milligrams or less of sodium per day, and then you drink a coffee or you exercise, you're pretty much going to net 0 sodium intake, right? And so you could imagine what that's going to cause in the way of problems, health problems and symptoms for you. So, you know, their recommendations are silly because not only do they recommend that you only consume 1,500 milligrams or less, they also recommend that you exercise every day. So therefore, if you're exercising and only consuming that little amount of salt, you're pretty much going to be net 0 at the end of the day. And your body needs this. It's very important. So that's kind of the irony of that situation. Now, the other thing that we really have to take into consideration here is it's not just about sodium. The fact is that sodium works synergistically with other minerals and electrolytes in the body. So for instance, when we look at these electrolytes, we have to consider sodium, we have to consider potassium, we have to consider calcium and magnesium. And this is very important to consider all of these because the fact is if you have low amounts of potassium, it will cause you to have a sodium depletion. If your calcium's off, if your magnesium's low, and vice versa. So we want to make sure that we're not only increasing our sodium intake, but we're also getting adequate amounts of all of those other electrolytes as well. And this is why every day I drink an electrolyte formula. And this is very important to me because I exercise and you know, have stress and I drink coffee and all these things that could cause me to lose sodium from my body. So therefore I use an electrolyte formula. I'll put a link in the description to the one that I use. And now, as we look at just general sodium intake, we have to take into consideration 2 ways that we can increase this sodium intake into our daily diet. So first of all, sodium and all these electrolytes shouldn't just come from an electrolyte powder. I use it as a booster. It also should come from your meal. So eating leafy greens is going to be something that's very good in order to increase your mineral intake. Now also, you can use other things in order to help increase sodium intake. So first of all, pink salt, Himalayan salt, or even Redmond's sea salt is going to all be good for you in order to actually increase your sodium intake every single day. Now, how much of this sodium should you consume? Well, according to most of the literature, in order to reach adequate amounts daily and not suffer from many of the different symptoms I've mentioned today, what you want to do is you want to consume between 3,000 and 5,000 milligrams daily. Okay, now think about this. The American Heart Association said 1,500, the 1,500 or less. The FDA, the CDC said 2,300 or less. I'm telling you 3,000 to 5,000 milligrams. If you're somebody who's exercising, it could be more than that. If you're somebody who's exercising heavily, it'd be even more than that. So you want to take all of these things into consideration when you talk about improving your health and doing it naturally, okay? Because the fact is you've been lied to about salt. Salt is very good for you. It's very healthy. And quite frankly, when you look at a lot of the health problems that people face today in the way of obesity, in the way of insulin resistance, and all the other issues out there, what we realize is that if people weren't avoiding salt and they're actually increasing their intake of salt, you would see a lot of that stuff start to go away, because you take salt out of the diet, you have more cravings for sugar, for bad foods. And then also you get more insulin resistance, you get higher blood sugar. And so this is just something that spirals out of control. So we definitely want to make sure that we're keeping our salt intake up to adequate amounts between 3,000 to 5,000 milligrams per day so that we can experience the best health possible. And the thing is if you're having people tell you to avoid it because it's dangerous, you just maybe could educate them, or you just don't take their health advice. And if your doctor is telling you that, maybe it's time to consider a different doctor, because the fact is salt is something that is good for you. I hope you enjoyed this video. And if you really like this video, I recommend that you check this one out next.